Welcome to Windy Hill Crochet. Today we're so excited to bring you our very first release of a Lovey snake.
We've been working really hard on getting ready for our first market at Cheese Days coming up in September. And on our list of things that we need to make for our booth, we wanted to have a snake.
Yes, this is the very first one that I made up. So I was thinking, okay, those knotted loveys that we love to make so much, the tricky part about making the arms and the legs is that they're really tight.
Yeah.
Right? And they're hard to go around and around for a long period of time. And I'm like, what if I make a snake's body that's kind of like a lovey, but a little bit bigger so that it's not so tight to go around and around. I'd crochet up really fast using a half double crochet instead of just a single. Then I designed the head. So that's the very first thing that I did, was design this head and then made this nice long body. It worked up really, really quick, and I made it long enough to put a little knot in it. You don't have to put a knot. It looks really cute also, just being a long snake. But I think putting the knot in it is really, really cool.
Yeah, it's a fun little character addition.
Yeah, but they're really easy to make up. And then I went to town making all the very fun colors, and the knot makes up in about 10 rows. So I've loved actually making these snakes with the spot for the knot in a different color. Let's see, this one's also like that, where the knot's a different color. And this one, I just wanted to bring this to market for our viewers because this is a really fun free pattern that we're going to be offering to you. So there's a step-by-step tutorial, and then you'll also be able to download a free pattern following the link in the description box. So let's get to the tutorial. For this project, you'll need a 6.5mm crochet hook, stitch marker, stuffing, sewing needle, scissors, and I love using Premier Basic Chenille Brights yarn. We're going to start by making a magic ring and crocheting 6 single crochets into your magic ring. I love the Premier Basic Chenille Brights because of the colors that they come in. It's also stable and easy to pull that magic ring closed. But Bernat Blanket yarn is also an easy yarn to work for beginners and would work equally as well. Now you will see that I count my stitches backwards to see where my first stitch actually is, because I find when I'm crocheting with plush yarns, it's not always easy to find that very first stitch in your magic ring. We're going to single crochet into that first stitch, and then we're going to put 2 single crochets into the next stitch. That's it, called an increase. So we're going to do that around row 2, single crochet and increase 3 times. Then when we get to the end of row 2, we will no longer have 6 stitches, but we will have 9 stitches. Now for row 3, I'm going to put a stitch marker in on my first stitch because we are just going to single crochet all the way around. And when I'm only single crocheting, I do not like counting my stitches. When I'm increasing or decreasing rows and I have a small project, it's easier not to use the stitch marker, but I find it helpful when I am doing just single crochets to know exactly where the beginning of my row is. So you'll find me sometimes using the stitch marker and sometimes not. So row 3 finishes with still 9 stitches. Then row 4, we're going to use 2 single crochets, 1, 2, and then we have an increase. So 2 single crochets in the same stitch. We're going to do that 3 times going around our row 4, and that increases the number of stitches. Row 4 will no longer have 9 stitches, but it will have 12 stitches. You see, I'm going to throw that stitch marker back on my first stitch again because Row 5 is just going to be single crochet all the way around, 12 stitches total. Okay, I'm taking that stitch marker off again because row 6 is going to single crochet and then increase, which is 2 single crochets in the same stitch. We're going to do that all the way around, so this is going to be where the head kind of opens up a little bit bigger. We have that single crochet increase 6 times. So by the time we get to the end of row 6, we will now have 18 stitches. I'm putting the stitch marker back on because we're going to be doing just single crochets around for 2 rows. So this way, I think one of the hardest things about amigurumi is always counting your stitches, and so whenever I don't have to count, it's like a brain break. So using the stitch marker, while initially I didn't love it and I didn't like to take the time to put it on, it is nice just to put yourself on autopilot and crochet single stitches without having to think about it. So 2 times around, here we go. All right, I won't need that stitch marker for a little while now. We are going to start to decrease. We're going to have row 9 single crochet and then a decrease, which means that you're going to pull loops from 2 stitches and then finish your stitch. So we're decreasing 2 stitches into 1. On this row, I'm just pulling from the front loops of 2 stitches because it's still pretty easy to get those front loops here, but you'll see in the next row when I decrease, I'm just going to go through the whole stitch because I think it's very difficult as the circle gets tighter to start decreasing down to where the snake's body is going to be. It gets harder and harder to get around this circle. And for some reason, this particular yarn felt very sticky. I think it was the humidity of the weather that we've been having here, but I just felt like my crochet hook wasn't smoothly going through my yarn. I struggled just a bit, so that's why it looks just a little bit difficult. So by the time I get done with row 9, we're going to have 12 stitches. And we're going to need to start stuffing the head because on the next round, it's going to be too tight of a circle or an opening to get the stuffing in. Now, I put a lot of stuffing in this head. I put it in really firmly. I think that's really important because when we get to the part to sew the eyes on, you're going to want to catch that stuffing underneath your stitches. Also, there's an optional tongue. If you want to put the tongue on the snake, you really need to have quite a bit of stuffing firmly in place to help hold that tongue on because we're going to attach all those things at the very end. So here we do a decrease stitch. So we are turning 2 stitches into 1. And by the time we get around this row, we're only going to have 6 stitches. This is the hardest part of the project, in my opinion, is getting this decrease and then starting the first 2 rows of the snake's body. It's just really tight. It's a little looser than the Mama Made minis, but it's still kind of a tight spot right in finishing this head and starting the body. Then it gets easier again. See, that last one's pretty tricky. So we have 6 stitches going around. I do take a little more fiber fill and just put it in there to make sure that everything is nice and firm inside the head. And then as we start the body, we are going to change from a single crochet stitch to a half double crochet stitch. That's gonna actually make the body work up very quickly, and it's going to give a really soft texture to the body. So we yarn over before we make our stitch. We put it through the stitch, the hook through the stitch, and then yarn over and pull back through the stitch. We yarn over and pull through all of it. You can see that's going to help build our body up really fast. And again, these first 2 rows doing the body are the trickiest because it's just tight. But I don't know if you can tell in the video, I use my middle finger to keep that middle hole open. It helps me get my crochet hook in. Sometimes my hook rubs against the front of my finger, which could make my finger a little sore. So if you find that, you could put a band-aid over your finger just to give it some protection there. But normally my crochet hook goes right in front and isn't like sliding against my finger all the time. But you'll see me as I'm working through this body that middle finger is my leverage point. I'm going to be putting the video into a faster play to get all the way to row 56 because we're just going to continue to half double crochet all the way to row 56. However, if you would like to color change the knot on your Lovey, you are going to want to color change at row 40. Row 40 through row 49 is where the knot will go on the Lovey. And there's so many different ways that you can be creative with this snake. You can create just a 1-color snake and then it doesn't really matter. You're just gonna follow the stitch tutorial. But I love to throw in a lot of different colors. So some of the combinations that I have made, making the head and the knot a separate color from the rest of the snake, which means that you would create 1 color for the head, change your color, and then crochet all the way to stitch 40, then change back to the head color for 10 stitches, and then change back to your other color. It's also fun to change colors on the snake's body every 10 stitches or every 5 stitches or putting some other kind of pattern into it. I just think you can be super creative and create every snake different. So you will see that I am counting my way through here. It's sometimes easier just to use the crochet hook to find those stitches. And when you get to row 40, that's where I like to do a color change. But for this example, I'm making the snake all 1 color. But if you want your knot to be a specific color, this is where you would do your color change. You're still half double crocheting, and you will, if you want the color change, you're going to do 10 rows here. But we're still half double crocheting all the way to row 56. And then that is where we are actually going to start tapering off to get to the tail, the end of the snake. I sometimes get bored making the same project over and over again. So when I can change up the colors, I don't know if you make toys for family members or for markets, but I find changing up colors keeps me going, is very motivating. And even I enjoy making the same pattern over because I love when the pattern's memorized and I can just kind of work without having to look at a paper or my computer screen or my phone and keep track of where I am in the project. But I do love having the break from monotony by doing different colors. Okay, we've got our 10 stitches for the knot, and obviously if you've done a color change here, you're not going to need to use the stitch marker. But I like to put the stitch marker in here because we have 5 more rows of half double crochet before we start to decrease and taper off our tail. So that's the point. It's just so much easier to count 5 rows than it is to keep going back to the head to get that 55 rows, and then the rows 56 is where we're going to start our decreasing. Okay, here we are. We're going to decrease our first stitch and then half double crochet in the other 4 stitches. So it gets a lot tighter, right? This is a little bit more like those Mama Made Minis legs where it's a little harder to go around. So I still keep my middle finger in the center to use as leverage to get my crochet hook through. This is a little slower going to get these stitches made. And the next row, 57, we're going to just half double crochet all the way around. So we're still at 5 stitches. I'm just counting here so I don't have to keep moving my stitch marker. So counting those 5 stitches. Then when we get to row 58, we need to decrease again. I don't want my decrease to be in exactly the same spot as the 2 rows previous, so I'm going to actually do 2 half double crochets first so I can move my decrease to a different spot, and then decrease and do another half double crochet. So that's going to turn row 58 into just 4 stitches. Row 59, we're going to decrease and then have 2 half double crochets. So row 59 is going to give us 3 stitches. We're going to go around row 60 with those 3 half double crochets. Again, it's really tight, so it may take a while to get that crochet hook in and to get those stitches made. Again, I'm still using my middle finger to try to keep that opening. And once we have 60 rows, then we're going to decrease and close. And I kind of have an unconventional method for doing this. I stick my hook in from the outside, then I could not get my hook in, and I wanted to show you that. Every snake I've made, the next stitch for the decrease, I go in through the back to pull all of that shut and then fasten off. So I think it's a little unconventional. I don't know the correct rules, but it works for getting that tail closed. It looks really good. I fasten off, I bury my end inside the snake, and I tie my knot. I think it's super cute. I'll give you a couple of examples. You can see they look similar as the ones that I color change. They're so much fun to make. And now I'm going to show you how I make these friendly snake eyes. They are easy to stitch and be consistent every single time, and I'll show you where we're going to place them. We're going to count 3 rows back from the nose, and that is the front end of the eye. And then we go 3 more rows, and that is the back end of the eye. And we are going to use Bernat Blanket black and white yarn. I love how those turn out using those yarns. So I'm going to take my example, and generally speaking, when I first started making the snake eyes, I made one eye at a time and tied it off and buried the ends. But now that I'm good at it, I make both eyes at the same time. So if I made mistakes initially, I didn't like having to pull out 2 eyes. So you can definitely start your project by making each eye by themselves, so you don't end up frustrated if you make a mistake having to take both eyes out. But I've made so many of these now that it's just easier to make 2 eyes with the same thread. So I come in from the bottom of the head up in between rows 3 and 4, and then I go in between rows 6 and 7, and you're going to want to pull that nice and tight. Take both ends and get that pulled nice and tight, and we're going to make 5 passes. We are going to have one pass. Oh, there's my kitty cat. She jumped up while I was recording. We are going to make one pass with the white yarn underneath the eye. So generally speaking, when I am guiding the yarn where to go, I will only usually do one pass on the lower part of the eye because I'm going to have that white under there also, and most of the passes on the upper part of the eye. So here is pass number 3. Again, I stuffed that head really nice and tight because our yarn needs some places inside to catch so that it stays really the nice shape that I want it to be. But it's sometimes frustrating that the fiber fill will come out of the holes when you're pulling your thread through. So you see me constantly picking off that fiber as I'm going because it does come through, and it's just the nature of the beast, I guess you can say. Always picking off those extra threads. But 5 passes with the black is just the right amount to give a nice size. There we go, with that being up in the upper. All right. Now we're gonna move our needle on the yarn, and I'm going to go right back into where I just came out and go across. So we get in the same row. I have had some trouble making my eyes where they didn't look like they were on the same angle. So you'll see me kind of investigate which hole do I want to get the second eye into, because you don't want one eye kind of being more, I guess, up and down or slanted to the first one. So you want to make sure you select the right hole. So that's what I'm kind of gauging. Is it going to be that hole or the next hole over? And I decided that that original thought was the right angle so that they both would look the same. So that's the only other tricky part, is where you're going to put that second stitch. so that they look like they have the same angle. And again, you're going to need to pull tight now. You don't have that loose end to pull from. You're going to be pulling from the other eye, so make sure it's tight enough there. Again, we're going to go 5 passes. Most of the passes are going to be on the upper part. I have one there on the lower. The rest will go on the upper. And once we get our 5 passes made, I will be taking the yarn out the exact same spot that I started underneath the head. Now, I just want to tell you quick, I have made this mistake so many times, and it is always frustrating where I think my needle came out exactly the same hole as where I started, and it wasn't. That maybe there was one other thread in there that was between them. And so it's really important that you check to make sure both yarn where you started and where you came out is in exactly the same spot, because when you go to tie your yarn off, if it's not in exactly the same hole, you cannot pull your yarn back in to bury your knot. And I have had to take the eyes out so many times because I thought that I had it in the right spot, but I actually didn't. So you'll see me double checking everything to make sure it looks good. This is the spot that if you didn't quite get the right angle, you can still pull out your second eye, 1 stitch at a time. I think it looks really good. So, and I'm double checking, make sure there's no yarn in there, because it is a real thing. And we're going to be tying this nice and tight and cutting off our longer thread and then pulling the yarn inside. Again, that is why I stuff the head really firm, because then you know that these yarns are not going to go anywhere. Once I pull these yarns in, they're going to be nice and stable inside, and your eyes are just going to look wonderful. Yay, I think it looks pretty good. And now we're going to take our white thread. Again, this is the Bernat blanket yarn. And we're going to run a single pass on the underneath side of the snake eyes. And we're going to start by coming in through the bottom, just like I did with the black. And I like to start in the back of the eye and then run my stitch to the front. Again, I make sure it stays on the underneath side of the eye. And then when I poke it through to the other eye, I'm going to go back to the back. It's just going to give me more yarn to catch and a better angle to pull tight when you kind of have that diagonal in there instead of just straight across. So I go back to the back and then I'm going to run it to the front. And again, you want to make sure you are coming out exactly the same hole as where you started. Pull that nice and tight. Make sure that they're actually symmetrical, that there's no yarn between those two yarns. Pull them nice and tight, knot it. And again, we're going to bury it just like the black. And initially this is where I stopped with my snakes, and last week we put a sneak preview to the snake release, and I had thoughts of making a tongue for the snake, and one of our viewers suggested the tongue, and I'm like, okay, that's the confirmation that I need. So there is an optional tongue. And I think kids would love that, actually. So for the optional tongue, I will show you. Isn't he so cute? Oh my gosh. I don't know if you do that, but I do the squishy, squishy, squishy. Make sure everything's all good to go. and they look the same. I love how they all turn out the same. All right, so for the tongue, I have chosen to use Parfait Chunky yarn, a 4.5 millimeter crochet hook, and this tongue makes up really super quick. We are just going to make 4 chains, and then I'm going to slip stitch in the second chain from the hook. Then I'm going to chain 2 more times. I'm going to slip stitch back into the same stitch I just slip stitched into. And then I'm going to slip stitch back down those first 2 chains and fasten off. If you want a longer tongue, you can just create 1 extra chain on that front end or 2 extra chains. But I kind of wanted my tongue to be short on this one. And I forgot to mention, make sure you leave a long enough tail when you start, because we're going to be sewing these ends into your head. You can see I take it pretty far back and I'm running it through the fiber fill. Again, that's one of the reasons why it's important to have plenty of stuffing into the head, because you're going to want to catch the eyes and the tongue ends through plenty of fiber fill. I go straight in and then kind of turn it down, bring it through exactly the same hole. I make some adjustments. Sorry, a little of this is off the camera. It's really hard to keep it all in the right place and actually do the work. But you can see there's my little tongue. It could be longer if you wanted. And again, I make sure it's in the same hole. It's exactly how I want it. And then I am going to tie this really tight, because I don't want a child playing with this and pulling on the tongue and having the tongue come loose. So it's really tight. And it's really caught in there good with that fiber fill. Trim those ends and bury them. And this is super cute. I do have a couple other snakes that I put tongues on that you might see in some of the B-roll footage, and one of the tongues is a little bit longer. Look how cute this is turning out. I just love this little knotted Lovey snake. And if you could take a minute to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you get notifications, it really helps the channel out. It's free to subscribe, and you'll get notifications if you hit the bell when we release more patterns, which we have some more in the works. Thanks for hanging out with us today, and I hope you love making this snake.